The first warning did not come from an officer. It did not come from a map or a shouted order. It came from the sound. Not the slow, isolated crack of a bolt-action rifle. Not the familiar, measured rhythm German soldiers expected from enemy small arms. This was different. Sharper, closer, relentless. Shots overlapped, one after another. No pause, no breathing space. A German infantryman pressed himself deeper into the dirt, waiting for the moment he had been trained to recognize. The brief silence that meant it was safe to move. It never came. The firing did not slow, it did not break. And in that moment, long before anyone saw an American soldier, something became clear. The enemy was fighting by different rules. Rules that erased timing, rules that denied movement, rules that turned ordinary rifle fire into something far more dangerous. When American and German infantry units clashed during the Second World War, they were not just opposing armies. They represented two fundamentally different ideas of how infantry combat should work. The German army entered the war with a doctrine shaped by the First World War and refined through years of training. Firepower, in German thinking, belonged primarily to the machine gun. The squad existed to support it, protect it, and maneuver around it. Individual riflemen were important, but secondary. American doctrine took a different path. The US Army placed far greater emphasis on the individual infantryman. Firepower was not concentrated in a single weapon. It was distributed across the entire squad. Every soldier was expected to fight, suppress, and advance, even before heavy weapons arrived. This difference was not abstract. It was audible, it was visible, and it became deadly the moment both sides met in combat. By 1944, on the beaches of Normandy, in the hedgerows of France, and later in the forests of Germany itself, German soldiers began to notice something unsettling. American rifle fire felt overwhelming. Not because it was inaccurate, not because it was reckless, but because it never seemed to stop. At the center of this experience stood one rifle, the M1 Garand. The German infantryman's primary weapon throughout most of the war was the Karabiner 98K. It was accurate, reliable, powerful, but it was also a bolt-action rifle. After every shot, the shooter had to manually cycle the bolt, breaking aim, shifting position, recentering the target. This was not a flaw. It was a design choice that matched German doctrine: controlled fire, deliberate shots, and reliance on the machine gun to dominate the battlefield. The American M1 Garand was built on a completely different assumption. Adopted in the 1930s, it was the world's first standard-issue semi-automatic service rifle. Each pull of the trigger fired a round and chambered the next automatically. 8 rounds sat in an N-block clip. No bolt to cycle, no pause between shots. On paper, the difference seemed modest. Both rifles fired full-power cartridges. Both were accurate at combat ranges. Both were rugged. But weapons are not defined by specifications alone. They shape behavior. An American infantryman armed with an M1 Garand could fire multiple aimed shots without ever leaving his sight picture. Missed shots were corrected instantly. Pressure could be maintained without hesitation. The rifle did not make soldiers braver. It made aggression easier. And when thousands of ordinary soldiers were suddenly capable of sustained, individual fire, the nature of infantry combat began to shift, especially for those facing it from the other side. German infantry tactics relied heavily on rhythm. Rifle fire meant isolated shots. Those shots created pauses. Pauses created opportunity. Between shots, soldiers moved, they repositioned, they advanced, they withdrew. The entire system depended on recognizing patterns in enemy fire. Against American units armed with Garands, those patterns dissolved. A German rifleman fired once, cycled his bolt, and searched for the next target. In that same span of time, an American soldier could fire 3 or 4 rounds without interruption. Multiply that across a squad, and something strange happened. What sounded like a machine gun was often nothing more than multiple rifles firing in rapid succession. The effect was immediate and deeply unsettling. German soldiers waited for the lull that never arrived. They stayed in cover longer than planned. Movement slowed, assaults stalled. Fire superiority, once the exclusive domain of the machine gun, was suddenly being achieved by ordinary riflemen. This was not about marksmanship. It was about denial. Denial of movement, denial of initiative, denial of time. Even before American machine guns or mortars were brought forward, German units could find themselves pinned by rifle fire alone. The psychological equation had changed. Every enemy soldier was now a potential source of sustained suppression. There was no safe assumption anymore. Every American mattered. Combat is not measured only in casualties. It is measured in stress. For German soldiers, the Garand introduced a new kind of pressure, one that worked quietly, continuously, and relentlessly. Bolt-action fire allowed moments to breathe, to think, to reset. Semi-automatic fire erased those moments. When the firing never stopped, decision-making suffered. Soldiers hesitated. They waited longer than they should have, and hesitation in combat often proved fatal. This constant pressure wore men down. Veterans later described feeling as though American units were always one step ahead, always pushing, always present, even when no one was moving. The sound alone created the impression of numerical superiority. Urban combat made this even worse. In villages, ruins, forests, and hedgerows, reaction time became everything. A fraction of a second lost cycling a bolt could mean losing the initiative at a doorway or window. American soldiers could keep firing while advancing. German soldiers had to choose between shooting and moving. That choice, repeated again and again, eroded confidence. Fear did not come from a single dramatic moment. It accumulated. The realization came slowly, but once it arrived, it could not be ignored. German units began reporting being fixed in place by rifle fire alone. Not machine guns, not artillery, rifles. What they had been trained to identify as background noise had become a dominant threat. The most dangerous insight followed soon after. American infantry did not need perfect coordination to be effective. Even average soldiers acting independently could generate enough fire to control a fight. Mistakes were forgiven by volume. Missed shots were erased by the next trigger pull. German training emphasized precision, discipline, and controlled engagement. Those qualities remained valuable, but they were no longer decisive at the squad level. Fire density had taken priority over fire purity. By the time Germany attempted to field its own semi-automatic rifles in meaningful numbers, the war situation had already collapsed. Production was limited, logistics were strained, training time was gone. The battlefield lesson had arrived too late. The M1 Garand did not win the war by itself, but it taught a lesson that could not be unlearned. Modern infantry combat was no longer about the perfect shot. It was about denying the enemy the chance to think. After the war, the conclusion was unavoidable. The age of the bolt-action service rifle was over, not because it had failed, but because it could no longer keep pace. Post-war armies across the world moved toward semi-automatic and later fully automatic rifles. Firepower was redistributed downward. Individual soldiers became the primary carriers of combat momentum. The Garand was not perfect. Its clip system had limitations. Its weight was substantial. Its famous metallic ping became exaggerated in legend. None of that mattered. What mattered was what it represented: an industrial, tactical, and doctrinal shift toward sustained individual fire. German soldiers did not fear the Garand because it was flawless. They feared what it changed. It erased pauses. It broke expectations. It turned every encounter into a constant problem. And once the battlefield stopped offering time to think, The outcome of the war was already moving in one direction.